But this is the kind of detail that we got into the report, because what we realized is that a lot of companies at Series A stage don't have a handle on these numbers or don't know how to calculate them well enough. And so this is why I think it's worth talking about. And then the fourth question is the company retaining and growing customers specifically? So, and this is measured through net dollar and gross logo retention, generally via some sort of cohort analysis. So similar to the growth efficiency question a moment ago, VCs are really interested in what are the underlying churn and retention looks like for the business, because companies with a higher churn are just going to go through way more capital to maintain that same growth rate, and this churn can obviously significantly hamper that overall growth. And obviously churn and a company's ability to be upsold, that is very much dependent on who that company's end market is. So who are they selling into? So companies that are selling to SMBs, perhaps with a low contract value and maybe limited seats, they're likely to experience more churn and less upsell than perhaps an enterprise software company selling large ACVs, perhaps with the opportunity to sell more seats to perhaps other business functions. So benchmarks do very much depend on the customer segment, as I said, the company and who they're selling to. But generally speaking, if you've got an NDR around 100%, then you're in a good place. 100 to 125% is great. But if you've got NDR over 125%, then Series B investors are going to be really interested in your business, assuming that the other metrics are looking good. You're going to get a really good multiple, some crazy multiples we're seeing at the moment for companies with NDR over 125. And then logo retention really needs to be anywhere between 75 to 90%, depending on the segment that you're selling into, as I said earlier. And then finally, the final question, the one that is probably closest to my heart is the company selling efficiently? Because we've seen countless companies at Series A mess this up. I've even been in a couple myself, but we've supported them through Scalewise. And what typically happens is that they raise a decent Series A, they commit to hitting some big growth goals over the coming year. The money lands, and then they rapidly scale their sales team to meet those goals that they've kind of committed to. But they typically make a couple of big mistakes, especially we've seen first-time founders making these big mistakes. So firstly, what they do is they build a headcount-driven kind of top-down budget that assumes that if they hire 10 AEs, each with a quota of $1 million, then surely they'll hit 10 million R in X amount of time. They just don't consider enough, they don't put enough emphasis on the inputs that need to go into the model to achieve this. They certainly don't plan well enough for things like rep hiring and ramp time and rep attrition and average quota attainment, all of these things that are really important inputs, as well as obviously things like the pipeline growth and demand generation. Which kind of brings me on to the second point, which is the second big mistake, is that they underinvest in demand and pipeline growth. They assume wrongly, I'm afraid, that reps can both create and close demand efficiently and consistently, quarter over quarter, which just normally isn't possible. The model that they create really needs to be a bottoms up, not a top down model. And then much more emphasis has to be placed on the qualified opportunities that need to be created to make a rep successful. And that may mean having perhaps a higher SDR to AE ratio than they envisaged, or investing maybe more heavily in digital marketing and demand gen. But whatever you do though, the two metrics to be focused on here in this kind of selling efficiently is the magic number and the CAC payback period. And Series B investors are looking for companies that can, I suppose, efficiently leverage the capital that they're going to be given to grow sustainable revenue and profits. They want essentially repeatable sales where the company is spending a reasonable amount to generate an additional dollar of incremental revenue. And a company with a magic number of 1 is essentially spending $1 in sales and marketing to generate an incremental annual recurring revenue of $1 in the next quarter. And then the inverse of the magic number is what we call the CAC payback period, which helps investors understand essentially how long it takes for a company to kind of recuperate the cost of acquiring a customer. Now, I won't go into detail about how they're calculated. There's plenty written online if you just type in payback calculation. But these metrics, these two metrics, are absolutely critical to raising Series B. And so, yeah, and I think as it relates to, sales leaders and in the boardroom, one of the big challenges that we see, especially people that are maybe first-time VPs of sales, that are maybe in a Series A company, is they're very good at the kind of blocking and tackling, the coaching of reps, the defining of a playbook, the improving of a sales process. But what they don't always have their handle on, which can stump them sometimes, both when they're in the planning process with their CEO or CFO, but also when they're in the boardroom, talking about what they're planning to do and their go-to-market strategy and where they're going to be spending their time, is they don't have really a handle on these numbers well enough. And I think that's a real shame, because what it can lead to, and I've seen this actually fairly recently, is a VP sales signing up for a revenue plan or a number, in 2022, where they really couldn't push back in the right areas, and they couldn't partner with, in this case, it was the CFO, in a way that enabled them to come up with a plan that was going to be achievable and realistic to hit. They didn't understand exactly what the conversion rates through the funnel were, what the average order value and sales cycle were for the different segments of customer that they were selling to. They didn't understand, what the cost of acquisition was and how much they could be investing. Most importantly, they didn't understand how many leads or amount of pipeline the reps would need to be successful, both whilst they were ramping as new reps in the business, but also when they were fully ramped. And it's a lack of knowledge around some of those core metrics that we see a lot of first-time VPs of sales really get caught out on when they're in the boardroom, but also when they're planning, as I said.